It's a real pleasure to be here this evening in Durham, my first time in Durham, and I bring greetings from Hornsey and Wood Green and from the Shadow Foreign team in the House of Commons, which is led by my colleague David Lammy, who's the Shadow Foreign Secretary. And it's always wonderful to be in a university town and to see so many young people and to be here in person and doing something in the flesh. And of course the question is that the House would boycott the 2022 Winter Olympics. And I'm supporting the motion to boycott the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, but first, to define the boycott. The boycott should be a diplomatic boycott, not a boycott for athletes or for the free press. A diplomatic boycott would prevent UK ministers lending legitimacy to an autocratic regime where our government's own country reporting on China outlines deep concerns about human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region, details increasing repression in Hong Kong in breach of the bilateral agreement which the UK struck with China in 1985, and worrying concerns about freedom of religion of belief in Tibet. As we sit here tonight, the Games are in full swing, with the world's best athletes competing at the very highest levels, with millions of people watching them and cheering them on across the world. And these few weeks could and should be a genuine celebration of China's role in the world and the Chinese people with their rich history, customary warmth to outsiders and diverse interests should be able to feel proud of the country holding this pinnacle of sporting success. And as a former English teacher in Nanjing, I can say how much I enjoyed not just sport in Nanjing in China, but also a wonderful welcome as a university teacher there. However, there are serious concerns around what is happening in China, which does overshadow what is currently the Winter Olympic Games, robbing the Chinese people of the pride that should be felt. And while the world's media concentrates on the prowess of the athletes in Beijing, conditions in other parts of China are very different. Let's just talk about those 3 points of concern. The first is in the Xinjiang province, home to the minority Uyghur Muslim population, and scenes reminiscent of the darkest days of Europe in the 20th century playing out, with the recent first-hand World Uyghur Tribunal unveiling evidence of mass incarcerations of the local population, reports of systemic forced sterilisation, executions, and an oppressive and ever-present security state focused solely on the civilian population. These scenes have been met by a chorus of international criticism, with mounting calls that these incidents are nothing short of genocide, a position that the British House of Commons endorsed in a vote last year. It's not only in China, however, that the Uyghur face repression and intimidation, and just this week, Index on Censorship, which is an important non-government organisation, released a landmark report detailing the many incidents of Uyghur people in Europe facing action from the Chinese state. And these actions are completely unacceptable and demand a response. Briefly on Hong Kong, which I won't dwell on because we have the well-known author Nathan Law, who's going to talk to us about his experience. But we know that China openly breaks the legally binding Sino-British agreement which promised freedoms for the people of Hong Kong, freedoms which they and we, as a free country, cherish and hold dear. In the past few years, we've seen democracy trampled, including the removal of a number of Legislative Council members of the opposition disappear and not reappear on the ballot paper in the December 2021 elections. The independent media have been silenced and visas refused to our own Financial Times correspondent James King and the BBC's John Sudworth. The recently introduced national security legislation has allowed mass arrests and deportations of democracy activists and journalists to the Chinese mainland and into detention. Many thousands of Hong Kongers have been forced to flee their homes and their lives in Hong Kong, fleeing to safety in the West or in Taiwan, including here in the UK, and we will hear more from our inspirational Nathan. Many, like Nathan, have faced Hong Kong's young people who dream of a better and freer future for their city and their families, a future which is increasingly being denied. And externally, a further point, what's happening on the borders with China. For example, the border disputes with India, not a good signal. Increasingly, the number of military activities in the sea and air around Taiwan and engaging in territorial disputes with other Southeast Asian nations in the South China Sea. The use of constant intimidatory air and sea and surface exercises have not gone unnoticed. But this style of diplomacy with other countries has also become more domineering and aggressive in tone, and I regret this. Prior to the President, Xi Jinping, having his core leader status, the dialogue was much more friendly and much more a sense of genuine sharing with one another. But in recent years, the tone of some of the dialogue with diplomats from the PRC has really become much more aggressive in tone, and I think that is reflecting some of the debates coming out of Beijing at the moment, souring the dialogue on crucial issues like trade arrangements and plans to tackle climate change. Climate change, of course, being the one central area that we should be able to work on together without talking too much politics. So, in the light of these concerns around human rights, trade friction and national security, how could we possibly attend and applaud the current Winter Olympic Games? It's right that the UK and its allies are holding a diplomatic boycott of the Games in a powerful show of international solidarity. But there is still a significant risk that due to the lack of the freedom of press, that the Chinese government will chalk up these games as a political win in a naked attempt at sport washing to hide the behaviour and treatment that is going on underneath our noses. So what does China need to do? I believe that China should allow a United Nations-led human rights investigation into the treatment of the Uyghur people in the Xinjiang region, and secondly, reverse the national security legislation and allow the free press to return to Hong Kong with immediate effect. Despite being an optimist, I do not believe that either of these developments is likely. Therefore, we must undertake these sorts of symbolic boycotts. We cannot sit idly by. It is right that nations are held to account for their actions, and I urge the House to support my motion. Thank you.